One of my favorite moments in sports came in 1998 when the Detroit Red Wings won their second of back-to-back Stanley Cups. The prior offseason, a limo driving Detroit's Slava Fetisov and Vladimir Konstantinov crashed into a tree. The driver had fallen asleep and was driving on a suspended license. Konstantinov spent several weeks in a coma and suffered paralysis and brain damage. It was the tragic end to a career that saw the Russian defenseman finish as high as fourth for the Norris Trophy on a team that starred Nicklas Lidstrom. Throughout the season, the Red Wings wore a patch in honor of him and the team's masseur, who was also nearly killed, and they also kept Konstantinov's or Vladdy's locker untouched with his gear and a rock with the word "believe." Konstantinov sat in the stands for Game 4 of the final, and once the Red Wings won, he was brought out onto the ice. Captain Steve Yzerman was handed the Stanley Cup, and after he raised it up, he brought it to Konstantinov for an unforgettable celebration. To many Red Wings fans and to me, this is their most iconic moment in their history, and that's exactly what we're talking about in today's video for every team. Now, I've seen similar videos, and while many of those goals and those moments will appear in this one, I'll also be sure to spotlight some other significant moments, some of which led up to what we consider that iconic point. These are just my takes, but if you can name an even more iconic moment for your team, comment down below and maybe I'll find a way to fit it into a future video. Let's go to our next team, that's the Washington Capitals, and as Josh comments, it's Alex Ovechkin raising the Stanley Cup and sharing an unforgettable moment with his longtime teammate Nicklas Backstrom. They had been teammates together for 11 years and hundreds of goals. I also want to spotlight TJ Oshie's celebration with his father, the late Tim Oshie, who passed away from Alzheimer's in 2021, and in Oshie's first game back with the team, he scored a hat-trick. The most iconic goal from the Caps Stanley Cup run came in overtime against the Penguins in Game 6 of the second round. The Capitals going into that series were just 1 for 10 against Pittsburgh, but Yevgeny Kuznetsov had something to say about that. Now for the Penguins, I'm not just going to focus on Stanley Cup celebrations or playoff goals, but you can't deny how magnificent Lemieux's goal was in the 91 final or Jágr's in 1992, let alone Chris Kunitz's goal to send the Penguins to the final in 2017. In 1993, Lemieux was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, causing him to miss 2 months. On his final day of radiation, he flew out to Philadelphia to join his team against the rival Flyers and was greeted by a standing ovation from what is one of the NHL's most hostile crowds.
Lemieux comes in, shoots and scores! Mario Lemieux trails it in, his 40th of the year.
That season, the Penguins set an NHL record with 17 straight wins, and despite playing just 60 games, Lemieux beat out Pat LaFontaine for the Art Ross Trophy with 160 points. He also won the Hart Trophy, the Pearson Award, and Masterton Trophy. Had he played the whole season, Lemieux may have set new records for goals and points in a season. Lymphoma, as well as other ailments, cut Lemieux's career significantly short. He had to retire in '97, but came back in 2000 to a packed Mellon Arena crowd. He assisted on Jaromir Jágr's opening goal and added one of his own in the second period.
Jágr comes in, makes a good move to turn back. Hit move! Mario Lemieux gets a goal! 3-0 Pittsburgh. Listen to this crowd!
And even though he only played 43 games that year, he finished runner-up for the MVP. Now for Lemieux's opponent in that game, the Toronto Maple Leafs. First of all, I just want to acknowledge how classy the Maple Leafs were in honoring Borje Salming just weeks before he lost his battle to ALS. I could talk about the 1942 Stanley Cup when the Leafs became the only team to ever complete a reverse sweep in the final. But I'm going to flash forward to Game 6 of the 1964 final when defenseman Bobby Baun fractured his ankle and came back for overtime and scored the winning goal to tie the series.
Langlois shoots it off the boards. Bob Baun lets it drive. It goes, score! Bob Baun let it go. It bounced in front and went into the net.
Toronto won Game 7 to win its 12th Stanley Cup. I think this moment epitomizes the toughness and perseverance of hockey players as much as just about any moment, so that's why I chose it. Of course, I could also talk about Bill Barilko in 1951, as the Tragically Hip wrote a song about it and his disappearance, so maybe that really is the most iconic goal and moment for the Maple Leafs. As for the team they beat in the final that year, the Montreal Canadiens, well really, how do you choose just one moment? Saku Koivu's return from cancer, Eric Desjardins becoming the last defenseman to score a hat-trick in the Cup final, Maurice Richard becoming the first player to ever score 50 goals within 50 games, Howie Morentz's funeral, the Too Many Men goal in the 79 final against the Bruins, and there are so many more I could highlight. But you know what? These all share something in common. They all took place at hockey's greatest cathedral, the Montreal Forum, the home of the Canadiens for 70 years. In 1996, for the Forum's final game, the Canadiens won 4-1, and afterwards the franchise honored many of their greatest legends from throughout the decades, including Jean Beliveau, Guy Lafleur, Guy Lapointe, Bob Gainey, Yvon Cournoyer, Serge Savard, Henri Richard, and the Rocket, Maurice Richard, who received a 16-minute standing ovation. Butch Bouchard, who captained Montreal to 4 cups in the 1950s, brought out a torch that the former captains passed around, symbolic of the team's mantra that dates back to the 1940s. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. The next day, the Canadiens brought the torch in a parade from the Forum to their new home, today's Bell Center. The Rocket passed away 4 years later at the age of 78. Now to their opponent that night, the Dallas Stars. I think the clear choice would be Brett Hull's cup-clinching goal, albeit a controversial one, in Game 6 of the 1999 final against the Buffalo Sabres. But I also want to spotlight one huge moment that led up to this. The Stars were down 1-0 in the series and tied at 2 in Game 2 late in the third period. Hull came up huge once again with an absolute missile. As for the team they defeated, well, of course it's May Day from the 1993 first round to complete a sweep of the Boston Bruins, and what a legendary call from the late great Rick Jeanneret.
He's made going in on goal. He shoots. He
But for this video, I want to highlight Game 3 of the 75 Stanley Cup Final in what is called the infamous fog game. It was an unusually warm day in Buffalo, and the auditorium didn't have air conditioning, so the humidity created a fog on the ice. There was even a bat that flew around the arena until Jim Lorentz killed it. The game went into overtime tied 4-4. Rene Robert would score the overtime winner for Buffalo, but the Sabres lost the series in 6 games to our next team, the Philadelphia Flyers. One of their most iconic moments is Bobby Clarke smiling with the Stanley Cup. Just beautiful. His overtime winner in Game 2 could certainly be the most memorable goal. Or maybe it was Keith Primeau's winner in the 5th overtime of their 2000 series against the Pittsburgh Penguins, longest game in modern NHL history. But the moment I want to spotlight came in the second round of 2010 against the Bruins. With his Flyers down 3-0 in the series, Simon Gagne, who missed a couple of games with a toe injury, scored the overtime winner of Game 4. He scored 2 goals in Game 5, and then his team forced a Game 7. The Bruins had a 3-0 lead in Game 7, but the Flyers clawed back with the winning goal coming off the stick of Simon Gagne.
Richards' shot redirected. Gagne shot. He scores! Simon Gagne! Can you believe it? Power play goal, and the Flyers all the way back now lead this thing 4-3.
That was just the 3rd reverse sweep in Stanley Cup playoffs history. Now for the Bruins, they'd avenged themselves the next year by winning the Stanley Cup. As for their most iconic moment, it's got to be Bobby Orr flying through the air in overtime of Game 4 of the 1970 Stanley Cup. But for this video, although it's not so much as iconic, I want to spotlight Willie O'Ree, the NHL's first black player. His NHL debut came on what is Cortana's birthday, January 18th of 1958 at the Montreal Forum. And let's not forget, Willie O'Ree was also legally blind in one eye. He just kept it a secret from Bruins management. Now, O'Ree only played in 45 career NHL games, but he had a lengthy hockey career overall and was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder. He has gone on to become one of the great ambassadors of this game. He scored the lone 4 goals of his NHL career in the 1960-61 season, but 2 of those were in his final 2 games, coming against the Maple Leafs and this next team, the Chicago Blackhawks. I think these 2 comments highlight perhaps the most 2 iconic moments after the 1967 expansion. 2 goals in 17 seconds to win Game 6 of the 2013 final. But to me, Patrick Kane's winner in overtime of Game 6 of the 2010 final is more iconic.
Watched by Kimo Timonen to the net. Leighton stopped it. Where's the puck? It came loose on the other side. It's over. Patrick Kane has scored the goal.
1, because it ended a 49-year cup drought. Yes, I actually did the math right this time. And 2, because of course Kane knew that the goal was in, and so did a couple others on the ice, but there was so much confusion on the ice, in the crowd, on the broadcast, and yet here's Kane in full selling mode. And lastly, another moment I want to highlight is Bill Mozienko's hat trick in a record 21 seconds in a 1952 game against this next team, the New York Rangers. Take your pick between anything from 1994, Mark Messier's elation holding the Stanley Cup and ending a 54-year drought, Stéphane Matteau's double overtime winner in Game 7 against the Devils in the conference final. This, I think, is probably the most iconic goal in Rangers history, but I have covered that quite a bit between my two channels, and for this video, I want to spotlight the captain, Mark Messier. Trailing 3-2 in that series, the captain guaranteed a victory in Game 6, and he backed it up with a natural hat trick.
For the empty net, Mark Messier. Do you believe it? Do you believe it? He said we will win Game 6. He has just picked up the hat trick.
And then he capped off that run by scoring the winning goal in Game 7 of the final against our next team, the Vancouver Canucks. Now, certainly we could point to Alex Burrows slaying the Dragon in 2011 after the Canucks had been eliminated by the Blackhawks the previous two playoffs. Not to mention Kevin Bieksa's crazy overtime winner in the conference final and the clutch goals to start the final against the Bruins. But hey, Canucks fans, I left Pavel Bure off my Canucks Mount Rushmore, and I don't want to leave out one of the best moments for this franchise and his Hall of Fame career. It came in the 1994 playoffs. In the first round against the Flames, the Canucks trailed the series 3-1 and won games 5 and 6 in overtime. In Game 7, they trailed late in the third period and tied it up on a Greg Adams goal. And then in the second overtime, Bure slipped through the defense and found himself one-on-one with Mike Vernon.
Brown ahead for Bure. Bure going in. He scores! Pavel Bure has won it for the Vancouver Canucks.
Now let's talk about the team they defeated, the Calgary Flames. One of the NHL's most iconic moments is Lanny McDonald, mustache and all, holding the Stanley Cup for the first time and after 16 years, retiring as a champion. His productivity had dropped a lot over the last couple of years, but he still had something left in the tank. In his final game, he put the Flames on top 2-1 in the second period, helping guide the Flames to their lone Stanley Cup. The Flames became the only non-Montreal team to win the Stanley Cup inside the Montreal Forum. McDonald would later be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame too. It really was a great run for Alberta hockey teams. The equivalent of the Western Conference champion from 1983 to 1990 was either the Flames or this next team, the Edmonton Oilers. Now, it would be easy to choose anything Gretzky, from winning the 1984 Stanley Cup to scoring his 50th goal in just his 39th game in the 81-82 season before anyone even had 30. Those are probably the most iconic moments, but the moment I want to spotlight came in the 1984 Cup final against the New York Islanders. The Oilers had been swept by New York the previous year and were held to just 6 goals that whole series. Islanders goaltender Billy Smith won the Conn Smythe, and over 2 years had also won a Vezina Trophy and a Jennings Trophy. So Edmonton goaltender Grant Fuhr had to take his game to a different level. In Game 1, he stopped all 34 shots, registering the second of his 8 career postseason shutouts. His stop on Brian Trottier stands out the most. A Kevin McClellan goal early in the third was all that Edmonton needed offensively, and from that game on, they knew they could shut the Islanders down. They won their first Stanley Cup in 5 games, and as for their opponent, well, the Islanders' most iconic moment is probably Bob Nystrom's cup-clinching goal in overtime of Game 6 in the 1980 final. This was the first of 4 consecutive Stanley Cups. No other team has won more than 2 in a row since then. But the moment I'm honing in on came after the dynasty in what stands as the longest Game 7 in Stanley Cup playoffs history, what's referred to as the Easter Epic of 1987. The Islanders had battled back from down 3-1 in the series, and late in Game 7 tied things up at 2 courtesy of a Brian Trottier goal. And then finally at 8:47 into the 4th overtime, Pat LaFontaine sent the Capitals packing.
Out front, shoots, hit a stick, comes to the line, LaFontaine shot, he scores! LaFontaine at the blue line, here in the 4th overtime.
We know how legendary the Islanders teams of the 80s were, but that Capitals team had several Hall of Famers of their own, including Mike Gartner, Larry Murphy, Rod Langway, and Scott Stevens, who would later come to serve as the longtime captain of our next team, the New Jersey Devils. I think the Devils' most iconic moment is Jason Arnett's cup-clinching goal in double overtime of the 2000 final against the defending champion Dallas Stars, but I'm going to go off the board with what I think is another signature moment in Devils' Stanley Cup runs. In 1995, New Jersey had swept the heavily favored Detroit Red Wings, holding the league's 3rd-ranked offense to a mere 7 goals in 4 games. In Game 1, Stevens laid a hit from behind on Keith Primo, who wouldn't play again until Game 3. Slava Kozlov had already scored 4 game winners in the playoffs and had scored Detroit's first goal in Game 2. In the second period, Stevens delivered a mighty hit on the Russian winger.
Detroit back in. Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. Is that Rouse?
Oh, lights out.
No, that is Kozlov.
Kozlov was concussed but played the rest of the series, but he wouldn't register a single point following the collision. Devils assistant coach Larry Robinson would later say, "In some ways the Kozlov hit did reinvent Scott. That was Scott's first cup, and so much of our success in that series was based on that hit. How much confidence it gave us." Stevens' teams later won the 2000 and 03 Cups, and they went all the way to Game 7 of the final in 2001, facing off against the Colorado Avalanche. The Avs' most iconic moment came in that same Game 7. Colorado won its second Stanley Cup on the back of 2 Alex Tanguay goals and a power play tally from Joe Sakic. One of the greatest defensemen of all time, Ray Bourque had played over 1,500 games over 22 years, winning 5 Norris trophies. When Sakic was presented with the Stanley Cup by Commissioner Bettman, he immediately handed it off to number 77.
The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche, and after 22 years, Raymond Bourque!
Now let's move on to the Avs' opponent from their first Stanley Cup, and that's the Florida Panthers. I think you can pick something from either the 96 run to the Cup final or from 2023. 96 has the Rats, but 2023 will have 2 of the most clutch playoff goals of that decade. I thought about Matthew Tkachuk's quadruple overtime tally in Game 1 of the conference final against our next team, but as one fan pointed out, that goal doesn't happen without another goal. And that is Carter Verhaeghe's overtime goal in Game 7 against the record-setting Boston Bruins, capping off one of the most historic upsets in league history.
Tkachuk with Carlo, now Bennett, for Verhaeghe, shoots, he scores! Carter Verhaeghe did it! Let's go home, baby!
One in which the Panthers trailed the series 3-1 and had to scratch and claw their way into the next round. Before falling to the Golden Knights in the final, Florida had also knocked off the Toronto Maple Leafs and this team, the Carolina Hurricanes. Just like other Stanley Cup moments, for Carolina, I think of Rod Brindamore's epic moment with the Cup. I think that's probably the most iconic moment, and for a goal, we could probably choose his Game 1 winner coming with just 32 seconds left. But I can't make this video without acknowledging just how special and iconic David Ayers' win was in February of 2020. The then 42-year-old Zamboni driver for the Maple Leafs AHL affiliate had to come in as the Hurricanes' emergency backup goaltender roughly halfway into the game. Ayers conceded goals on the first 2 shots, but made 8 saves to help the Hurricanes hold off the Leafs 6-3. This was the first time an emergency backup goaltender had been credited with a win since Len Broderick with the Canadiens in 1957, and don't forget, Ayers was 42 years old. Just days later, he would fly out to Raleigh to sound the pregame siren for the Hurricanes, and the city of Raleigh declared February 25th as David Ayers Day. Our next team is the one that drafted Ayers as coach from that game, Rod Brindamore, 9th overall in 1988, the St. Louis Blues. In 2019, the Blues won their first Stanley Cup in franchise history after waiting over 52 years. Among the players, Pat Maroon was probably the most compelling story. He grew up in the St. Louis area and after several years in the NHL, signed with the Blues so that he could spend more time with his son, who lived in the area with his mom. Now, as far as goals go, we could easily point to Carl Gunnarsson's Game 2 overtime winner in the final against the Bruins, but I still think the one that stands out the most came at the end of the second round against the Dallas Stars and their goaltender, fellow St. Louis native Ben Bishop, and it came at 5:50 into the second overtime of Game 7.
Blues face 53 shots. Blues control. This is Thomas. Thomas shoots. It's behind the net. It's not in.
Maroon would achieve a rare accomplishment in today's NHL, winning 3 consecutive Stanley Cups, 1 with St. Louis and 2 with his next team, the Tampa Bay Lightning. If we're talking about iconic goals, then it has to be Martin St. Louis' double overtime goal in Game 6 of the 2004 final against his former team, the Flames. That goal brought the series back to Tampa for a winner-take-all. In Game 7, Ruslan Fedotenko scored both Lightning goals, and Nikolai Khabibulin saved 16 of 17 shots as Tampa won its first cup. The iconic moment came when Commissioner Bettman awarded the cup to Captain Dave Anderchuk, who had played 22 years in the NHL waiting for this moment. What I loved was how he tried handing off the cup, but his teammates said, "No, go take your lap with this, you've waited for this forever." Now, Lightning coach John Tortorella would engineer some other amazing playoff moments, including with our next team, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and in this case, he was actually coaching against one of his former teams. Now, if we're going to talk about a single goal, we'll look no further than Rick Nash in 2008 against the Phoenix Coyotes. But for an individual moment, it has to be the team's sweep of the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 2019 playoffs. The Jackets were just a second wild card and were facing a Tampa team that had tied the '96 Red Wings with 62 wins in the regular season. The Jackets had trailed 3-0 at the end of the first period in Game 1, but found their own lightning in a bottle, never looking back. If I were to choose a single moment from the series, it's got to be Oliver Bjorkstrand's go-ahead goal late in the second period of Game 4.
Glendening
Panarin across. Dubois in front of bodies. They score! Oliver Bjorkstrand!
Columbus would score 3 more empty netters in the third period to win 7-3. Now back then, the Jackets had Sergei Bobrovsky in goal. His backup, Joonas Korpisalo, would set the record for most saves in a playoff game the next year with 85. He's now with the Ottawa Senators. Their most memorable moment is probably Daniel Alfredsson's series-winning goal in the 2007 conference final against the Buffalo Sabres. But I think it's also important to spotlight Game 2. The Sens had a 3-2 lead and were about to take a 2-0 series lead, but Daniel Briere tied things up for Buffalo with just 6 seconds left. But in the second overtime, defenseman Joe Corvo scored maybe the biggest goal of his NHL career. The Senators lost in the Cup final to our next team, the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks' most iconic moment, apart from raising the Stanley Cup in 2007, has to be Paul Kariya's goal in Game 6 of the 2003 final. Earlier in that game, he had been concussed by Scott Stevens, but came back and scored the biggest goal of his career. Unfortunately, because of the concussion, he doesn't actually remember this moment. I've talked about this more in other videos, so I'll move on to the 2007 run. Now, just to get to the final, the Ducks would have to take down the Detroit Red Wings. Easier said than done. The series was tied at 2 heading into Game 5. The Ducks were down by 1 goal, and with 48 seconds left, Scott Niedermayer scored on the power play, and then the Finnish flash, Teemu Selänne, came up huge in overtime. The Ducks would mostly cruise in Game 6 and in their 5 Stanley Cup final games. As for Teemu, he also scored some thrilling goals with his first team, the original Winnipeg Jets, who in 1996 became what is now the Arizona Coyotes, and don't worry, I'll touch on the original Winnipeg Jets in just a bit. If I were to choose a moment just for the Coyotes, it'd be from the 2012 playoffs, and as you can see here, the Winnipeg wideout tradition was adopted in Arizona. The Coyotes took on the Nashville Predators in the second round, and in Game 1, Ray Whitney scored an amazing goal right off the faceoff to give the Yotes the 1-0 series lead.
His wingers are very active off these faceoffs.
They get their top line out. Ansel, Whitney, and Verbata. Here's a chance. They score! Ray Whitney is the hero!
They'd fall in the conference final to the would-be champion LA Kings, but let's go to their opponent, the Predators. I boil this down to 2 moments from their run to the Cup final back in 2017. There was Kevin Fiala's overtime series-winning goal as the Predators swept the top-seeded Chicago Blackhawks, but I think it's still kind of hard to top Colton Sissons' go-ahead goal in Game 6 of the conference final against the Anaheim Ducks. Awesome drive to the net by Sissons, terrific pass from Kalle Järnkrok, and the spill from Sissons actually gives this moment even more character. But just not to leave it out, there's also Mike Fisher's overtime winner in their longest playoff game, coming in triple overtime in 2016 against my San Jose Sharks. Game 7 against the Golden Knights in 2019 could easily be the most iconic moment, but I've already talked about that plenty on my channel. So then, even though it's not as flashy, and perhaps not as iconic now, Jamie Baker's third period goal against the top-seeded Red Wings in 1994 is perhaps the most meaningful. In just their 3rd season and their first playing in San Jose, the Sharks were coming off a previous season of only 11 wins. But despite starting 0-8-1, they won 33 games to make the playoffs, a 58-point turnaround from last year, and one of the greatest ever. The Sharks had just lost Game 6 by a 7-1 score. The teams were tied at 2 when at 13:25 in the 3rd period, Chris Osgood came out of his crease to play the puck, but Jamie Baker had just hopped over the boards and saw a window of opportunity.
Osgood backhands, but not out. The shot from the puck. He scores! Jamie Baker, who scored the first goal of the series, scores the biggest goal in the Sharks' history.
The Sharks would lose in a heartbreaking 7 games against the Maple Leafs, but returned home to a parade that the city threw together to honor their new team. Other fans might point to 3 other iconic goals: Owen Nolan in 2000, Joe Thornton in 2011, and Joonas Donskoi in overtime of Game 3 in the 2016 final.
Donskoi tulee läpi kiekon kanssa. Donskoi laukaa ensään tekee maalin! Joonas Donskoi!
Donskoi would later be selected in the expansion draft by our next team, and that's the Seattle Kraken. At this point, the Kraken are just in their 3rd year in the NHL. There are some goals I could spotlight here. Yanni Gourde in Game 1 against the Dallas Stars in the second round of the 2023 playoffs. Oliver Bjorkstrand's 2 goals in Game 7 of the first round against the Avalanche. And they're actually just about to host the Winter Classic too. But I had to go with Jordan Eberle's overtime winner in Game 4 against the Avalanche. It was just the Kraken's 2nd ever home playoff game and the first to go to overtime. They would complete an upset against the defending champion Avalanche in 7 games. Now let's go to the other team playing in the 2024 Winter Classic, the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, apart from raising the Stanley Cup at home, if I had to pick a goal from the Golden Knights run, I might have to go with Chandler Stevenson's overtime winner in Game 2 against the Dallas Stars in the conference final. But the Knights' inaugural season is so integral to their successes since then, it's hard to find a moment more special than what happened on March 18th of 2018. In memory of the 58 victims who were killed in the horrific October 2017 mass shooting, the Golden Knights retired the number 58. The team was inching closer to the Pacific Division title and took on one of the teams that were trying to chase them down all year, the San Jose Sharks. William Karlsson scored the would-be game winner shorthanded, an absolutely stunning goal to cap off a memorable evening.
Karlsson looking for his second shorthanded goal in his many nights, and shot, score! What a goal! Through his own legs!
The Knights would fall to the Capitals in the Cup final, but on that run knocked out the Kings, Sharks, and this next team, the Winnipeg Jets. So if I were to choose one moment from the original Winnipeg Jets, I think the most iconic is Teemu going hunting against the Nordiques in his 76-goal rookie season in 1993. If we choose a playoff goal, maybe it's Brian Mullen against the Flames in Game 1 of the 1985 first round. In that game, the Jets battled back from down 4-1, and they would go on to win their first playoff series in the NHL. And then if I choose a moment from the current Winnipeg Jets, I would rewind back to the first round of the 2021 playoffs against the favored Edmonton Oilers. Winnipeg completed an unprecedented sweep against Edmonton, winning 3 straight games in overtime, including Game 4 on a triple overtime series winner from Kyle Connor.
And now, a golden opportunity. Kyle Connor shoots and he scores! Kyle Connor!
All right, well, now I'm all out of my clever segues, so let's go to geographically the closest team, the Minnesota Wild. There are probably 2 big moments in Wild history, both coming in a Game 7. In 2003, Andrew Brunette scored the overtime winner in the first round against the Avalanche, and that year the Wild would go as deep as they ever have in the playoffs to the conference final. Or you might argue that Nino Niederreiter's series-winning goal in overtime of 2014 against the Avalanche is just as iconic. But for this video, I want to spotlight a crazy goal that helped the Wild stay in that series. They trailed 2-0 and were locked in a 0-0 stalemate in Game 3, until at 5:08 into the first overtime, when Mikael Granlund unleashed this absolute beauty.
To the point, instead, he works his way back free. Granlund fires, scores!
And our last team is the Los Angeles Kings. Now, even though this happened over 40 years ago, I still consider the miracle on Manchester as the Kings' most iconic moment. It's certainly toward the top of the best comebacks in an NHL game. This was Game 3 in the first round in the 1982 playoffs against Wayne Gretzky's Oilers, who finished the season with 48 more points than the Kings. Now, the Oilers led 5-0 heading into the third period, but the Kings came back, tying the game with the net emptied with 5 seconds left on a goal from Steve Bozak. Then Darrell Evans scored the game winner in overtime, and the Kings went on to upset the Oilers in 5 games. Now, plenty of Kings fans will say the most iconic moment is Alec Martinez's cup-winning goal in Game 5 of the 2014 final, coming in double overtime. But we can't underscore just how much of a roller coaster that run was. The Kings had to win 3 Game 7s just to get to the final, and every time it was something different. They reverse swept the Sharks in the first round, only the 4th time in NHL history. Then they pummeled the Ducks 6-2 in Game 7 of the second round, and finally they knocked off the defending champion Blackhawks in overtime of the conference final on a goal from, yeah, you guessed him, Alec Martinez. So what other iconic or significant moments in NHL history would you like me to cover in future videos? Comment down below and stick around for more content on hockey history and culture. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Nick, and I'll catch you Twisters later.